As legislators, this is an opportunity for us to respond to and question the proposed draft of the business plan. And by asking questions, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're turning our back on the high-speed rail project in our, that our voters approved. But we do want to make sure that the project does provide the most overall benefit to our state, and to our constituents, especially by replacing automobile trips by passenger rail trips, right? Which is the overall goal, like my colleague, Ms. Friedman, brought up earlier. And so I just wanted to make sure to comment on that. But you mentioned the KPMG report, and that also due to COVID, the RFP was extended for the trade and systems procurement. Track, sorry, yeah. Do you have a date, a new revised date? I believe it was originally September when you intended to procure that contract, or put the RFP
originally,
out, right? The RFP.
Yes, I think the proposals were originally due in June, and then a decision by our board whether or not to accept those in September, and now we've pushed those back to September and November.
Okay. So my questions are about that contract and the process. So according to your business plan, and there's a section F that discusses the risks, and your consultant writes, the track and systems contractor is envisioned to be the key long-term contractor of the authority over a period of 40 or more years, and will be responsible for ensuring the entire high-speed rail system is available to the operator. As a result, it will be the most important contract to the authority and includes a significant amount of risk transfer, including interface risk with other contractors and additional scope of future segments. So this appears to be a very serious, very important contract you're planning to enter with. And even further, KPMG states, as currently structured, the track and systems contract also requires maintenance and life cycle payments once revenue service commences. This payment would be required regardless of the level of service that is implemented for the interim services. And the contractor will have termination rights under the contract if either revenue service does not start. So given this, KPMG recommends, therefore, prior to the execution of the track and systems contract, it's important to secure a memorandum of understanding with the California Transportation Agency, the San Joaquin Rail Authority, and other relevant stakeholders on the use of high-speed rail assets until the completion of Valley to Valley. So it seems you're still moving forward without taking into consideration concerns from this consultant. Can you please explain your rationale for entering into this contract despite the concerns that your consultant wrote about?
Yes, I think the risks that were identified in that refined business case study by KPMG were spot on. And what the consultant is saying to us is that we should make sure that we have at least entered an MOU with the entities that would be involved in the lease payments to use our assets to assure that our costs for things like maintenance are covered by that lease agreement, and that the commitment to cover those costs will be part and parcel of the ultimate and final agreement that we will enter into with any operator. And I think that's right, and we are at the beginning of that kind of work and that communication, both with the San Joaquin's folks and the CalSTA folks, just to make sure that that's understood.
Okay, so from this report, KPMG provides its own explanation for why you may be moving forward with the contract, and states, the track and system contract has a mechanism for determining the capital cost of all segments after the first segment, which includes a basket of indexation factors relating to inflation for labor and materials. So this could incentivize the authority to take additional risk by issuing a notice to proceed prematurely in order to secure a lower price. Does that sound right to you, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, to be clear, and it's been a while since I've looked at that specific section of that report, but I would just say that, one, getting the MOU in place prior to the execution of the contract is a good recommendation and one that we are working on, A. And B, the contract is structured in a way where it's all set on notices to proceed. The first notice to proceed is getting the 119-mile track put down. And the reason that we want to move forward with that is because that is a requirement under our federal funding agreement to get this work completed by the end of 2022. And so there's a reason for us to move forward on the contract. I think the protection element that we have in place is our board publicly has to approve the next NTP and each NTP before we do it. So our board will have a chance, and we will have a public discussion in our hearings about is it ready, is funding available, is the work on the ground done to enable this work to be done. And every expansion of that is another notice to proceed, or NTP, that has to go to our board. And they will not approve it unless funding is available and the work on the ground is completed to execute that work. So we are in a place where we have to try to get the track down. We got to get a track contract going because we have a federal requirement to do so. That's just on the 119 miles, and that is the first milestone of this pending contract. Every other thing is a sectioned notice to proceed that will not go forward if we're not ready to move forward on that. And so I think there's an ability to be cautious and prudent as we go forward, while at the same time getting the track on the ground consistent or pursuant to our federal funding agreement. And I would just say one other thing, I know there's been some conversation about whether the track should be electrified or have systems or not. And in our view, it should be. It's consistent with the original funding plan for this section that was approved back in 2016. And it's also because of the way you construct systems, electric systems, and the track, it's most efficient to try to do that together and not put down a track and then come back later and dig underneath that track to do systems and electrification. So that is how we have it proposed, but I think the separate NTPs give us some of the protection of not going too far too fast.
So you mentioned that you think that the MOU is a good recommendation, and so from all the other risks that were outlined in this report, do you intend to review them and discuss them either with the board or others before the contract?
Yes, and not all of the risks that they identified are tied strictly to that contract. So there are other risks that we certainly have to be mindful of and work through. So funding and other things. And so again, look, we are going to be prudent here in how we go forward. I said earlier in my presentation that certainly the times and all that's going on with COVID-19, which members have referenced, require us to be exceedingly prudent in how we go forward. I think pushing back this contract was part of that prudence. I think we're going to do a deeper dive on all of our risk analysis now to ensure that we are in a good place to move forward as we've proposed here. And so, again, the business plan laid out what we thought the best path forward was on February 12th. That was a little bit in front of the world changing dramatically. Now that it has, while we still think that this is the best approach going forward, we're going to take the time to do a deeper dive and make sure that we're doing this correctly.
My concern with, these potential risks are that, you would come back to the legislature for more funding, right? And that this project continues to be much more than we thought it would be. And so those are my concerns, if you stick to the business plan that you have drafted. I know others have commented on, potential alternatives that you may be exploring. But I think, we need to make sure that the risks are being taken into consideration and that we do not engage into a 40-year contract, right, before analyzing these risks and the potential costs additional costs that you will later return to us to approve.
Again, I generally concur with that sentiment, and if there's more that we need to say about how we are analyzing the risk tied to that, I want to consider that and think about how we address that, either in the final business plan or beyond.
Yeah, so I think as legislators, we're paying attention to this project. We're actively seeking potential alternatives, or whether the current business plan is the right way to implement the vision of high-speed rail in our state. This would be the first in the country if your timeline is correct. Or I know there are some other private ones that are in development, like you mentioned, the Virgin trains. But when we started this, there was a big vision for high-speed rail in California, in our country. But we want to make sure that it is done efficiently, and despite, like you mentioned earlier, that construction started before the right-of-ways, and I know that you're new to this, but we want to make sure that we are continuing in the right direction for California, and so we will continue to be active and ask questions. Yes. And I want to thank you for engaging with us, especially in the Assembly, which we have brought up a lot of concerns and want to see other project alternatives. So thank you.